Hello everybody, welcome to week 5 of Intermediate Accounting 2. I'm Maria Simmons, and this week we are talking about budgets, and I'm going to talk about the basics of state budgeting. This is my favorite topic, budgets that is, so I thought I would show you a little bit of what I do for a living, which is state budgeting. So I have a PowerPoint for you. So basics of state budgeting, Intermediate Accounting 2, Unit 5. The key players. This shows you a little bit of how a state budget works. It starts with the agencies of the state. We propose and we submit it to the Division of Budget, which is a part of the state. The Division of Budget evaluates our submission, and they give it to the governor, who also evaluates it. They present it to the legislature, the legislature research department actually, who also evaluates it. And then they both, after evaluating it, they present it to the legislature, who eventually approves the budget. Now, in between here, the legislative research department and the governor both have questions for the Division of Budget, who in turn comes back to the agencies with questions. So this is a circle. The legislature also comes back and asks questions. So once it's approved, then it goes back to the agencies to implement the budget. So these are the players in the state budget. Agencies, Division of Budget, the governor, legislative research department, and the legislature. So within agencies are also sub-agencies, like my agency is the Department of Corrections, but within the Department of Corrections we have facilities, and each facility has a budget, and we report to the Department of Corrections, who then submits one budget to the Division of Budget. So it's a little bit more broken down than just agencies, but this gives you the gist. This is our budget cycle. In July of this year, we were given allocations. Our allocations we were told what we have to work with and what we needed to start our budget with. We're currently here with September budget submission. I just submitted my budget, just mailed it off. I had to have 7 copies of it. Mailed it off on Monday, priority mail, so I know it went there. I sent it off to Topeka. There is an electronic submission as well, but they like to have copies of the budget sent to them. I sent it to the Department of Corrections, who, like I said, will take our budgets and combine them with all the facilities to make a Department of Corrections budget. Then it's reviewed, and Department of Budget makes their recommendations. In November, there's an agency appeal if Department of Budget makes any recommendations we don't agree with. The governor makes his recommendations, and in January, it is presented to the legislature. There are appropriations bills that are made. February, there's a legislative review. It's discussed. April, an omnibus session if required. State Finance Council. June, executive directives. That's when everything is approved. Right in here. So once our budget is submitted, we are in our budget. We're actually using our budget because our budget year starts, which I'll show you, That's a couple slides down, but I submitted the budget, and it takes this long to get it approved, all the way into April, and it can go into June if they can't agree. So the agencies have two types of budgets for budgeting purposes: an annual budget, which we submit an annual budget each year on September 15th. They're due on September 15th. And a biennial budget, which they submit every other year on September 15th. Those are just for certain agencies on the annual cycle. So each year we either do, this year it was on the biennial cycle, so we had to do the current year, which we're in fiscal year. We do fiscal years, so we are currently in fiscal year 2019, and then I do 2 budget years, which was 2020 and 2021. Next year I will do the current budget year, which is 2020, and update 2021. So it's every other year I have to do three budgets, 3 years of budget, and this is the year I had to do 3 years of budget. So, I said we are a fiscal year. The federal government is also a fiscal year, but their fiscal year runs from October 1st to September 30th. The state of Kansas, their fiscal year runs from July 1st to June 30th. And like I told you, our budgeting cycle runs, it's due on September 15th. We are currently in 19, but I submitted any budget changes for the current year. I just submitted those, but I'm already in this year, so those changes won't get approved actually if I had any, which I had a few. Those actually won't get approved until the year is almost over, which it's kind of hard to understand that, but that's how it works. Cities and counties, they run on a year, they run on a calendar year, but it's their fiscal year, January 1st to December 31st, and the tax year, of course, is January 1st to December 31st. Like I said, Kansas, our current year that we're in is fiscal year 2019. The budget year that we're budgeting for is 2020. Our out years are 2021. We did not budget for 2022 yet, but those are considered out years, 2021 and 2022, etc. Now we're going to talk a little bit about allocations, appropriations, expenditure limitations, and allotments. So, allocations. This is the first step in planning for the upcoming budget year, and the Department of Budget provides the governor and agencies with budget allocations in July. In July, I received our number, what we had to work with to budget our entire budget. I received those numbers in July and started working. You really work backwards from there. It's like fitting a square peg into a round hole. So just for rounding sake, I will tell you that, say I was given $13 million, I start with salaries because that's a fixed expense. I have to fit salaries into there, so I work with salaries. Then I go with our utilities because I know about where that's going to go. Then I fit everything else that we have. I have to fit into whatever's left. So our salaries range $10 to $11 million every year. That takes up the majority of our budget. Then our utilities, $1 to $1.5 million. So you can see with the $13 million budget, I don't have a lot left over. And only certain funds allocated. We get all of our money from the state general fund. We do have a fee fund, that's what it's called, that we bill another agency for some of our employees that actually do work for them. They reimburse us for their salaries. We work, these are given to us to give preliminary budget numbers and Department of Budget's broad framework for slicing the state budget pie. Like I said, we have to work with these numbers even though the budget is not necessarily approved yet. So we use these allocation numbers as a starting point for budget preparations for the upcoming budget year. It establishes a base budget. We begin with the budget approved by the legislature. So the legislature did approve our 2019 budget last year. So we are working off an approved budget for fiscal 19. It's just if we had any changes, they approved it in the 2018 legislature. But if we have any changes, which there are always slight changes that we like to make, we have to get those approved in the 2019 legislature, so we have to go through that process. But we use those budgets that were approved in the 2018 legislature as a basis for 2020 and 2021. We adjust the base budget. The division of budget may add or subtract monies to account for specific items, one-time expenditures, debt service, fringe benefits, or other known changes. We did not have any of those this year. And based on projected revenues, the budget director will develop scenarios to plan for the use of available monies. We do not generate revenue, so we are not part of those affected agencies. We only generate expense of those agencies. Appropriations. Appropriations is an amount of money for a particular purpose that an agency is authorized to spend during a fiscal year. The entire amount is usually available at the start of the fiscal year. It is given to us at the beginning. July 1st is the first day of the fiscal year. It is given to us at the beginning of the fiscal year, and it is available for us to spend. It's in the State General Fund, the SGF, and it's the largest uncommitted revenue source available to the state. It's a fund to which most general tax receipts are credited. These are some other appropriated funds: the State Water Plan Fund, Economic Development Initiative Fund, Expanded Lottery Act Revenues Fund, and the Children's Initiative Fund. We do not get any money. The Department of Corrections does not get any money from any of these funds, only the State General Fund. Appropriations bills. It's the legal mechanism used to move the money. The types of appropriation bills are supplemental, mega, and omnibus, and the statutory citations to the 2018 Session Laws, Chapter 109. That is where you would find the 2018. Expenditure limitations. That is the maximum amount that may be spent in a given fiscal year. It is specific to special revenue funds. That special revenue funds receives funding from a dedicated source of revenue. Types are limited and no limit, and examples are the Healing Arts Fee Fund and the State Highway Fund. This does not apply to the Department of Corrections, but I wanted to show you that there are some funds that have expenditure limitations on them. Allotments. The procedure under which appropriated funds are reduced when resources appear insufficient to cover appropriations. It is intended to ensure that expenditures do not exceed resources during a fiscal year, and it is made on a case-by-case basis, and it does not have to be across the board. Agencies do have the right to appeal and rescissions allows the governors to make across-the-board reductions by a fixed percentage to retain an ending SGF balance of $100 million. This has happened to us before. Under governors, they have made across-the-board decisions, across-the-board cuts. It has happened to the Department of Corrections, not necessarily to our particular facility. Revenues and expenditures. Consensus Revenue Estimate, or CRE. This is the official estimates for the State General Fund, and 2 estimates are given to the general state population, to the news media, to the citizens of the state of Kansas. These are given in November and April, and they are developed by using a consensus process that involves the Division of Budget, the Kansas Legislative Research Department, the Department of Revenue, and 3 consulting economists, 1 from each of the following universities: University of Kansas, Kansas State University, and Wichita State University. As I said, the Department of Corrections is not a... I said that we are a revenue generating agency. However, I misspoke, because we do generate some revenue at Wichita Work Release, where our offenders are required to pay room and board. We put back in the State General Fund approximately $1.5 million a year. So I was wrong when I said that. I misspoke. We do. It's not necessarily revenue generating, but in a way it is. We can't sell something to make more money. It is solely based on the number of offenders that are at Wichita Work Release, and it is based on their income. That is how much they pay in room and board. The governor's budgets uses the November estimates as a base, and the estimates adjusted to reflect the governor's recommendations, and that affects the State General Fund's receipts. The legislature starts with the governor's proposal. They incorporate April estimates and adjust for enacted legislation. And you can see the CREs there posted on the Department of Budget website, and that is below. Categories of expenditures. State operations expenses for the day-to-day business of state government include salaries and wages, contractual services, commodities, and capital outlay. Aid to local government. Payments made to governments that provide services at the local level and having tax authority in most cases. General state aid to school districts, disaster relief, special city and county highway aid, etc. So this up here is what I deal with those are my main categories for expenditures: salaries and wages, contractual services, commodities, and capital outlay. Contractual services include utilities, contracts for copiers, contracts for services such as pest control. Commodities include payments for clothing, uniforms, things like that. Capital outlay is expenses for things like if we have to buy a new vehicle, or if we buy desks, chairs, anything like that, tools, those would go in capital outlay. Other assistance, grants, and benefits. Payments made to individuals and agencies that are not governmental in nature. Social services assistance, higher education scholarships, claims against the state, crime victims compensation, etc. Two things on here that are that do coincide with our Department of Corrections: claims against the state and crime victims compensation. We do deal with those on a regular basis. Debt service, principal and interest payments for bonds. We do not deal with that. We do not have any bonds. Capital improvements, expenses for rehabilitation and repair, construction, and remodeling of state-owned buildings and facilities. We do have a capital improvements budget, and we will be talking more about capital improvements next week. So, to go over the general concept of a state budget, appropriation is a specified amount the agency is authorized to spend. Reappropriation, that is the unexpended funds remaining at the end of the fiscal year that are carried over to the next fiscal year. So if you have any money left over, if you're lucky enough, they will carry it over to your agency the next fiscal year. If you're unlucky, they will sweep it back up into the state general fund for the state to be spread out again. Usually they reappropriate it, but sometimes they do not, depending on the balance in the state general fund. Limited reappropriation, amount over the limitation on expenditures from a reappropriation, requires state finance council approval. That has never happened to me. Lapse, portion of an appropriation that is not spent or reappropriated. That has happened to me where I have not spent all of my appropriation and they have taken it back. It's not been a lot. I usually do pretty good in spending all of my money. It's been $1,000 or less. An encumbrance is it's an accounts payable. It's tied to a specific fiscal year. So if I want to spend the money but I do not have we've ordered it, but we won't have time to get the invoice. That is the encumbrance. So say I want to spend the rest of my appropriated money on a vehicle, but I will not have time. It's the last day of the fiscal year. I will not have time to go out and get that vehicle. I am going to put in a purchase request for that vehicle for $30,000 to go out and buy that vehicle, and that will save that money in that specific fiscal year, and I can spend it and it will be fiscal 18 money instead of fiscal 19 money. That's the next example. So it makes sure you do not lose that money from fiscal 18 and do not spend fiscal 19 money. So it's considered an expenditure for budgeting purpose. There is a lot of that going on at the end of the year if we are trying to get down to zero. We need to make sure we are there. So that is the end of my slideshow. Like I said, this is one of my favorite topics, budgeting. It is what I do. I've spent the last 3 months doing it on a daily basis. It's my favorite thing to do. I do budgeting and forecasting. I do forecasting for the rest of the year, making sure that we are staying on budget. If you have any comments or questions, do not hesitate to get a hold of me. You can email me. Just let me know if you need anything. Hope you guys have a great week.